Our planning team wanted to provide an opportunity to learn about a wide range of public-private partnership opportunities that can help to bridge the gaps that some of our communities may encounter and community members may encounter and that employers themselves may encounter. And on this panel, we have a number of perspectives represented so that we can learn how different entities who have an interest in seeing an economic opportunity is more readily and equitably accessible. We can learn about how they've pursued and supported innovative partnerships and other opportunities. And just a real quick introduction of our panel. On my right, your left, is Garret Groves with Austin Community College. He's the Vice Chancellor of Strategic Initiatives. He joined ACC in February 2018 and leads efforts to identify emerging needs, evaluate opportunities for collaboration, and build strategic partnerships to benefit the region and the ACC and ACC students. We've already heard from Amy in the center here, and thanks for helping us out with the panel as well, and for being a great host along with the city of Pflugerville. And she joined Pflugerville Community Development Corporation in 2014 and was appointed director in February 2016. And before that, she was CEO of the Greater San Marcos Partnership. So having regional impacts just with her in our region, right, in two very important communities in our MSA. And then finally, we have right closest to me is Neeraj Aggarwal. And sorry if I didn't say that correctly, with the Michael Susan Dell Foundation. He's a program coordinator. He works alongside program teams in India and the US in executing and managing mission investments at the foundation. They have made catalytic mission investments across its India-based microfinance, health, and education initiatives, and its US-based education and health initiatives. And so I'm going to target my questions a little bit because there's a lot that they all could cover individually, or they could take up the whole time for the panel, but trying to kind of hone in on a few partnerships that they would like to share, right, and that can hopefully spark some conversation because you might see something that might interest you and your community. So we'll start with kind of community college perspective. And again, with Garret, we know that ACC has an immense portfolio of educational programs, as well as an incredible role to play in the workforce arena. ACC is one of our local institutions from whom I've come to expect innovation, just because of the great frequency of announcements, of new and innovative programs and strategies being pursued by the community college district. So you have a tough task ahead of you in terms of picking and choosing what you want to share with our participants today. I want to see if I can narrow it a little bit by, asking you to focus on areas of elevated interest from community members or, private sector companies, kind of how you may have responded to these requests, because I'm sure they're fast and furious coming your way. And also, what challenges has ACC faced in responding to these trends as they emerge?
Absolutely. And thank you very much, everyone. I'm thrilled to be standing between you and lunch, so we will try to keep this quick. Yes, there's a lot that I'd love to share and talk about, but first, it's nice to be back in a room with folks in an event. It's good to see that we all don't like sitting up front, that some things don't change. There's a lot going on, and I think oftentimes we heard today a great set of kind of layout of how our world is changing, but I still don't think we fully grasp how quickly our world is changing here, and certainly in Central Texas. We, at Austin Community College, we educate over 40,000 students a year, and that's just in our credit programs. We're almost the size of UT Austin. We have another 15,000 students we train outside of those programs on an annual basis. There's a lot happening, and it's very difficult to answer a question there. I'll just say, we know there's a lot happening now. Apparently, just a couple of months ago, there were over 80 manufacturing companies looking for over 100,000 square feet in this region and couldn't find enough space to do that. I've have a conversation later today with a major aerospace drone company. I've had 2 flying car companies reach out to us and others. That just the innovation and what's happening and what the future looks like. A lot of that's happening in Austin. We're getting mentioned nationally. We're getting talked about as a giant metro region, and yet the question needs to be asked, who are we building this economy for? And I've heard a lot of that today. And that's where I see my role. Our systems weren't designed well for the world that we were in 10 years ago, 20 years ago, yet alone this one. And so my role as a Vice Chancellor of Strategic Initiatives is to help our college system change, adapt, break it where need be to do more work, like what we've been talking about today. So usually the question way that you frame that is everyone wants to hear me talk about Tesla, which I'm happy to do later. A lot of that's being rolled out as we speak, but I'm happy to circle back there. I'll highlight our work with Samsung, which many of you who are native Central Texans know that 20 years ago, this sounds like deja vu. We made a huge effort to grow that economy. And up until the current day, Samsung is one of our best partners for building that earn and learn pathway. There is a number of programs that we've developed with them, almost all of it with regional partners. So here, Workforce Solutions, Tamara Atkinson's team and work, they've have us meeting regularly with not just Samsung, but a lot of the semiconductor companies to build special training for entry-level workers. What's the quickest, shortest training that individuals can do to get a job in these great career-building companies? But then with Samsung, we've built a number of earn and learn opportunities. They have their own customized apprentice program. We have a number of grants that we're able to draw down to train. We spent, in the last 6 years, it's been almost $7 million the state's helped fund, in addition to other work, to train Central Texans and upskill individuals at Samsung. So there's a number of programs there that we're now using to replicate across that industry with other partners, and that's one of our best models. You heard Tamara talk about Baylor Scott & White. It's Toyota. It's a number of companies like that. So I'll happy to go deeper there with industry partners. One other example I want to highlight is actually one I just learned more about this morning. United Way has been doing amazing work with the Federal Reserve Bank and our community here. Paula Silvestri just gave me an update today. She's in the back of the room. Talking about how we are piloting what I understand to be one of the first universal basic income projects in the country. So with their leadership and with funding from the Annie Casey Foundation, there's now about 60 ACC student parents who are receiving $500 a month to increase the number of credits that they're taking at college, to get full wraparound supports, to get childcare support, and that's a pilot to then scale and grow to see how do we fund and sustain a project like that that's addressing a lot of, but not all of the needs we talked about today. There's a similar partnership that I know that United Way is doing with Workforce Solutions and with Goodwill and with SkillPoint to do similar work on training and efforts there. The last thing I'll just say is there's no way we can talk about all the different partnerships. There's no way we can reach the demand of what industry is asking us for. And yet, as I heard Paul Fletcher say, we continue to have a struggle to reach those individuals we're here trying to most help and serve. The information economy challenges we talked about before are real. Our systems aren't designed well to do it. Before the pandemic, we were talking about this region being one of the most economically segregated regions in the country. The pandemic has not made that better. We don't understand the full extent to which this has changed. We don't really understand the full extent to which Central Texans are gaining and losing out on all of the prosperity we're seeing here. And I hope sooner than later we're going to get a better understanding and picture of that, but that's the work that we're all here to do, and I just am glad that we're here and hope that we can do more of it as fast as possible.
All right, thank you, Garrett, for sharing that perspective. Again, we'll definitely get to Q&A part as we move through the panel here. But again, we wanted to give it a variety of perspectives. You know, this is kind of from an adult ed and higher ed, perspective, and we've want to have sort of a municipal perspective to a certain degree, since Pflugerville Community Development Corporation's partners so closely, with the city of Pflugerville. And we've come to learn, right, just how much Pflugerville is booming, and that a lot of very focused attention has been placed on strengthening and broadening sort of the workforce pipeline. And in our conversations, Amy, and also in your recent, earlier presentation, you mentioned recent kind of manufacturing academy and other training partnerships targeted to specific industries. With one having just been announced today, right? So we're all excited to hear about that, but can you please share details about these partnerships for those in attendance?
Thank you, Raul. Yes, it's been an exciting day today. I want to start with that announcement, if I may. We have been working, as you know, with partners in workforce education initiatives for some time. We've really amped that up over the past 2 years. One of those participants is SkillPoint Alliance. They're a nonprofit organization. They have funding that allows them to provide free training in different certified programs, HVAC, plumbing, electrician, manufacturing, all primary focused jobs. And so we sat down at the table about 2 years ago and established a memorandum of understanding. And with that, we didn't just write an agreement like we're going to be buddies. We sat down and we said, what are the things that you do? And let's talk about how we can feed into that. And let's memorialize it in a memorandum of understanding, so that we had a very clear understanding from the start what their mission statement was, what they could do, what they were doing. We had follow-up conversations about all that before we memorialized it in that agreement. So it was very easy then for us to begin work, because we'd already pledged, you can do this, we can do this. And so today, what's exciting was one of the initiatives that came out of that MOU 2 years ago is helping us to seek out and find those individuals. The biggest issue we have right now in putting people into training and to help them upskill is finding them, talking to them, getting out there and letting them know what's going on. And there's a lot of conversation right now about workforce education and training opportunity. So today, our announcement was in the building of a company that we recruited to Pflugerville, Rosendon Electric. And with that, we hosted a media event to actually publish and to push out the training that's available, free training that's available that they can sign up for in different trades. And we didn't just tell them, we showed them. We were in their facility, and we had 3 of the students that had gone through the electrician technician program and received their certification that had been hired by that company there. Then we did a tour of the facility inside. One of the barriers we talked about when we sat down at the table was that a lot of people don't understand manufacturing. They don't understand what happens under roof with some of these companies, and they're usually a very clean environment. But they have an unrealistic expectation of what it really means to work for some of those companies. So to have camera there, to have media there, to actually see us announce that, and the support that we had in Pflugerville for that, our unemployment rate in September 2021 was 4.5%. We're still not tracking with the region, and we're lagging some. So us trying to get out there and make sure that the population understands these jobs are available. So what we did was we announced the programs, we did a tour of the facility, we invited the media in, and we basically sold 35 seats at the table in training that's coming up in the next 60 days for SkillPoint Alliance. That collaboration, and with that announcement, we're hoping to be able to reach them better. The other way that we have provided assistance is through the Pflugerville Manufacturing Academy. Again, it's more awareness targeted, because with that program, we had the solid support of Texas Workforce Commission in a matching grant called the High Demand Job Training Grant. We had the solid support coming from Workforce Solutions, capital area, to administer those dollars and assist us. But in order to pull that program off, to provide 3D training, awareness training, it's a certificate of completion, we had to actually connect those employers with my friend over here at ACC, and we had to actually build original curriculum for that on their specific equipment. And that takes a lot of heavy lift. But once we did it and we had the curriculum, we were able then to push the program out. We had 2 types of participants. The first was residents and other people that weren't sure about whether or not they wanted to go to work for a manufacturer and were interested and intrigued with the 3D perspective, because that's really kind of jazzy in the manufacturing world. And getting them there that way, we were able to then help them learn about manufacturing overall, and then be able to experience hands-on and create something from their work that they did with the machine itself, under the supervision not only of the instructor from ACC, but also a technician on board in the facility to assist them with the use of the machine. We rented space and that technician and what it costs to provide the supplies. They broke the machine. I mean, they didn't break it. I'm sorry. they did not break the machine. And what they did, they had to set up, run the printing, and then they had to break it back down again and clean it. And so it gave them the hands-on experience. But what really stacked this up high for us was not just the people that we had involved in the program, and we had 40 involved with our first rollout of this event. But we started working with the Pflugerville ISD. And with that, we were able to develop another partnership with them in doing teacher externships. What that did for us, especially in our community, we have a lot of students in the high school, they're not sure where they want to go, what they want to do, but trying to get there and try to train them on the real exciting world of manufacturing is very difficult. But the teachers, in order to get their stipend in the externship, had to go back and then train the students in their classroom and provide 3 days of training out of the curriculum they received, and it was top-notch curriculum that was developed at ACC. And so with that, we took our numbers times 20, and we were like educating then 120 people in the high school environment about manufacturing. And it's not going to be an overnight success, but it certainly is opening eyes where that needs to be opened. That is where it needs to happen. In the high school, in the junior high, and trying to get there is difficult. But this program was very successful, and we really do applaud the work that we did with not only Tamara's group, but ACC, the ISD, Texas Workforce Commission, 3 different companies, EOS of North America, Cumberland Additive, and Essentium. And as we worked with them during the pandemic, one of those companies was able to get up and running on masks and provide PPE. We had several of our manufacturers do that. But what's exciting about that was we helped them get governmental contracting with the National Guard, which led to them getting contracting with the Air Force and an expansion in our company as a result of our work with them. So when we started looking at this program, it was anticipating that job growth that they would have, and they were able then to look at these folks as potential hires in the future.
All right, thank you. Amazing work that you're doing, and thank you for what the difference you're making for folks at all level in your community. So we're all, again, it's exciting to hear kind of the solutions, some real things on the ground, from our government partners, right? I mean, everyone's looking for solutions, right? The private sector, our government partners, and as you can imagine, so is the philanthropic community, right? The need has been magnified, right, during this last couple of years of the pandemic. The needs were there before, but obviously they've been magnified and amplified. And so again, we're all in this mode of trying to find, where is the sweet spot? Where are the opportunities? And we heard that a little bit from our panel, the previous panel, right, on economic and workforce issues in our region. But so to get a perspective from the philanthropic community, we turn to Neeraj, program coordinator for the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. And we appreciate you lending your voice to this conversation. Now, a foundation like Michael and Susan Dell Foundation doesn't have constituents in the same way as a municipality or a community college district. So members of the public won't vote you out, right? Or they won't vote down your bond proposal. And hopefully those things don't happen. It's just hypotheticals. But you still have an interest in bridging the economic divide and improving access to opportunity. So I suspect that you are out there looking for new ideas and innovative strategies to help us meet this moment. And at this time, when we are beginning to focus more intentionally on a post-pandemic economic recovery, kind of what areas of opportunity do you think show the most promise?
Awesome. Can everyone hear me? Great. Thank you. Nice to be here, everyone. I will say that up until 9 a.m. this morning, I thought this was a virtual event. So even in our pre-brief earlier this week, for some reason I didn't ask the question. I just defaulted. So I logged on, and at 9 a.m. I thought, where are the Zoom details? And to realize it was in Pflugerville. And I was like, where's Pflugerville? No, I didn't know that. I live in Mueller, so I can be a snob. Yeah, so as Raul said, I'm a program director, program coordinator at the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. My role is slightly distinct. You've heard from these folks who talk about, they're actually in the field, they're administering programs. We're a funder of a lot of organizations that do deliver the programming. So we're one step removed. My particular role, it's called market-based solutions. So when we think about public-private partnerships, we think about how do we invest in companies, for-profit or non-profit organizations, that can actually develop market-based solutions. So these can be early-stage companies, they could be later-stage companies, and they could be for-profit or non-profit. And one thing that we do a lot of is look at models that are working both in the United States, but we've also got an international footprint. And so we look at models that are working, that have worked or potentially working in India and South Africa, especially. That's where we have offices, or other parts of the world. As you may be able to tell, I'm not from the great state of Texas. I'm from Australia. So there are models that I have access to, or that we see from Australia as well. So I want to talk about two such models today that we're experimenting with, and that's our general philosophy as a foundation is to, and we see our role as really funding and supporting experiments in the sector, and then there are other folks that can, public sector or other folks that can take it to scale. But we generally don't have the funding, even though we do put out about $15 to $20 million a year in Central Texas. We try to spread that across as many organizations as possible, see what's working, and then have others try to scale that up. That's our general ethos and our philosophy. So two models that have been touched on, frankly, throughout this morning. One is around apprenticeships, and the second is around impact sourcing. So I'll touch on both of those, and what we see is the potential of both. And both of those one of them have a Texas-based orientation, one of them potentially has a Texas-based orientation. But apprenticeships, I think Stephen touched on that. Tamara actually touched on that as well. So the idea of apprenticeships are massive where I come from in Australia and in Europe. It's ingrained in the culture of, even when I started off, it was ingrained in the culture there to train or work with apprentices. And I've been surprised actually in the US that it's not, or at least in my experience, it isn't such a big thing. But there is a real notion that when you work in a company, that you actually take on someone, not as an intern, but you actually take someone on and train them and help them get the skills that they need. So apprenticeships are starting to really take off in the US. There's a big company called Multiverse, not Metaverse, not Meta, Multiverse. It's actually a UK-based company. They've raised a lot of funding in Europe. It's founded by Tony Blair's son, Owen Blair. And they've raised $200-300 million, I think, to really establish the apprenticeship system across the US. And these are mostly for tech jobs, tech and digital marketing jobs. So we think that that's a really promising model. We've just invested in a company called New Apprenticeships. They're based out in San Antonio. And New Apprenticeships is trying to do the same thing. The thesis here is that if you give folks a paid learning experience and you secure the employment opportunity before they actually start, then that gives them a pathway from training to placement. And then hopefully, this hasn't been proven out, but hopefully those folks who do the 12-month apprenticeship then get hired by the company after they finish the apprenticeship. Now this is an interesting area because it's one of the few areas that has actually gotten bipartisan support. So there's a National Apprenticeship Act, and this is the other reason why we're interested in this. The National Apprenticeship Act, which is still in Congress, has authorized about $4 billion to apprenticeships over the next 10 years. The goal is to create 1 million new apprenticeships. And so that's the other way that we like to think, because we're a relatively small part of the funding piece. We'd like to think, where are the federal dollars or the state legislature dollars flowing, and how can we experiment with models that could get state or federal adoption or funding. So that's an area where we think could be great. We've funded a lot of training programs that haven't always had employers at the table, or that they may have struggled with placement, but this model potentially provides the placement up front with the training incorporated. So that's the first model. The second model is we've seen this work in India. It's this idea of impact sourcing. And impact sourcing is, there's a company called People Shores, which we've just invested in. They're not based in Texas, although we're trying to get them to come to Texas. But they work in a place called Clarksdale, Mississippi. It's in the Mississippi Delta, one of the lowest income areas in the country. And the idea here is that the US, a lot of US corporates have outsourced jobs to India, South Africa, India and parts of Asia, whilst there have been persistent poverty regions in the country. And the idea here, this concept again is starting to take off, which is, instead of outsourcing, or in addition to outsourcing jobs such as business processes, level 1 tech jobs, call center operations, why don't we domestically outsource those jobs? So this idea of onshore outsourcing. There are plenty of persistent poverty regions in the country. Why are we outsourcing jobs internationally when we could provide similar jobs to folks domestically? So People Shores is one such company. There's a bunch of others, another called Rural Sourcing, which again has attracted a lot of private sector capital funding. But People Shores is basically working in rural communities specifically. So in Clarksdale, Mississippi, has anyone actually heard of Clarksdale, Mississippi? Okay, one person, so that's surprising. 3 people, all right. In Mississippi, okay, that's surprising. It's the home of the blues, which I didn't know until I got there. But it's a great community, but they've got no real industry there. All the industry's moved out. It used to be fully agricultural. All the industry's moved out. They have no real jobs. There are people that are leaving to Memphis and other nearby areas. The idea behind People Shores, set up a call center operation, business process operation there. They've hired about 200 people. They've got local employer partnerships. They've got national clients as clients, and then they will hire locally to fill those jobs. So that is a model that we're super excited by. We hope to bring them into Southeast Texas, Beaumont, where Stephen's from, and Port Arthur, where there are similar challenges there. But they're just two of the models that we've been thinking about. Like I said, that we've seen have some national or international success that we think could have application in Texas as well.
All right, thank you. Very great perspective there. Great way to think about some of these global trends. I guess there are kind of national and global trends, and how do we again capture the opportunity, right, that is inherent in those, right, for our local community. And kind of before opening it up for some questions, I did want to just because we did have other folks we talked to about public-private partnerships, right? Just because, given the affordability issues in our region, right? I think other issues that job seekers encounter, right, have to do more with, like it was mentioned before, childcare, kind of housing. And during the pandemic, right, there was all this economic relief that was needed. There was food, utility assistance, housing assistance. And so I guess, you may not have a great example. So if you don't have a good example, are there any partnerships in kind of that holistic, right, approach to kind of the needs of job seekers that you're seeing, or that you think there's a need for, right, if you don't actually see, have something to point to? But I do think that's, we will, as a follow-up to the summit, highlight some of those partnerships too, around housing and food and digital access. Again, digital access is such a huge challenge during the pandemic, right? And is there kind of anything you would share, around those kind of other issues that are not necessarily always in the workforce arena, right? But that obviously affect the ability of kind of job seekers to succeed and take advantage of some of this. And I know, again, it's kind of a theme across what we've been hearing, right, this morning. But if anything you would share, that would be great. And if not, we'll just kind of go back to questions from the audience here. Anyone?
All right. I've been voluntold to give a shot at this. I think I might want to structure that question a little bit. We've heard some of this. I think it's important to think about the different levels we're engaging. So at a high level, there's absolutely federal engagement that I'll leave on the table. There's state policy engagement and there's tax policy locally. We heard some of this. I think Vanessa Soria had a good question about taxing and things that cities can make. It's important to note that both PCDC and ACC, we have a taxing district, right? These are votes we make and how we allocate resources, and that level is important to think about. How we advocate for policy change. There's a question earlier about paid sick leave. City of Austin at least recently had a push on this that involved the state pushing back on these decisions, right? A lot of these levels, we need to engage at different levels, and we can't ignore that political engagement, policy engagement. And how we pay attention to that. There's a on-the-ground pilot level. We've all talked about pilot programs where we're trying to address holistically how if you just provide one particular service to an individual or a family, we're not serving that entire family, and it's not enough. It's not enough to just provide access to healthcare alone or to provide access to training for a job alone or transportation, and yet doing all that together is a big task. It speaks to the challenges that we're all facing, and so having good, strong pilot efforts to try to understand how are we serving individuals? How are we hearing from the people we're serving? Are we actually helping? Are we providing solutions that are needed? Oftentimes I've been part of efforts to try to provide childcare, for instance, but realizing that the individuals we're serving don't want childcare for a short duration, or they don't want childcare at ACC because often families need childcare closer to home or work. It doesn't do as much good to give childcare at their place where they're getting their training or their education if they're only there twice a week, right? So that's important for why pilot programs are so drastically needed, or what's working. I try to stay somewhere in the middle. That's why I'm working at Austin Community College, because I'm very interested in scaling those pilot programs. How do we reach and take something that's working for 10, 20, 60 students or people and get that to hundreds? And there's a reason why even in the private sector, we'll talk about the team that creates a brand new company is often not the team that's needed to then scale that company and take it the next step. And that's where our workforce solution partners are so important. That's where PCDC and entities like Austin Community College need to think differently about how we scale and partner with those companies and those nonprofits and other partners who are doing really good work on the ground. And so we could bore you to death with examples at those different levels. I won't do that now. I think that's how I'd approach that question.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I do think you make a great point there. And since you kind of highlighted Paula's here and United Way and the work they do around Success by Six, in terms of early childhood, in terms of the 2Gen Coalition, is in highlighting these kind of family-friendly workplace strategies, which, again, was something we were going to try to incorporate here, but it was a little too much. So we will have a kind of a panel as a follow-up to this summit on companies locally who have striven to create a family-friendly workplace, because, again, you can address some of these issues via the private sector, right? So that's part of the sort of the public-private part of the conversation, but we knew we couldn't cover everything here today, but just did want to kind of mention kind of United Way's work, and there was, because I do think it, again, we're going to hear from, I think Texas Mutual is going to be one of the companies we highlight, and I think they have a local presence here in Pflugerville, and they're very excited to highlight what they're doing around creating a family-friendly workplace. And so we want to, again, talk about some of those strategies, and again, what's the best way to approach it, right? There's so many different ways to approach these challenges, and how do we approach it in a way that in the end is best for the folks we're trying to serve. So Amy?
Raul, I just want to mention, one of the things we do in economic development is we have what we call a business retention expansion program. With that, we go out and we talk to the companies on a regular basis. That feedback is extremely helpful not only to our local officials when there's issues, whether it's regulatory or transportation or employment, whatever it is, we have their ear. Sometimes it's really difficult to get to that employer, and so offering up our resource of that kind of conversation that we have on an ongoing basis has been very, very instrumental in us allowing more conversation to occur between the workforce providers who are trying to reach those individuals and find out what they need and provide job fairs and additional training for those industries, but also for us to connect the dots. We do a lot of that with our high school, trying to connect the dots back to the industry and introduce our career technology instructors to them, teachers specifically, and then get those people working together on trying to track students into certain career paths that they're interested in. So I think what we have to do as a community, and I mean that in the greater sense, not just Pflugerville, although we are the center of the universe, is to really think about, like what we've been talking about, is the lifestyle of that individual, the family they have, what their issues are, and that's on a very, very selected individual basis, and trying to really overcome, Garret, how you get to those people and understand their needs for childcare, and how you can, Neeraj, put together those pilot programs in communities that work. And by the way, Pflugerville is the perfect place for you to do that. We welcome a pilot program here. It'd be fabulous. So,
That's why she's good at her jobs, ladies and gentlemen. This is...
pshaw. Anyway, we really do welcome the involvement and the engagement, but it is tough work, and we got to do things different. And apprenticeship is one way to make things happen. Europe is all about apprenticeships, and us trying to repackage, reform, and do new things, but we can't do it without partners. And that's what we're here talking about today, is we can do it. We can advance our community, but we can only do that if we're working together collectively and figuring out how those pieces come together.
All right. Any final thoughts, Neeraj? Or
No,
any?
I'm good.
All right, well, let's get to Q&A from the audience, and I'll kind of make my way that way. If someone wants to raise their hand, there's Steve over there. I'm going to try to get there as fast as I can.
Hi, I'm Steve Swanson. I've been on the Workforce Development Board and the CAN Community Council, and we won't talk about how many years ago that was, but it's been a while. And I'm grateful today to, first of all, be part of an activity like this, but to hear somebody talk about looking at the separation between those with and those without, and to hear people talk about actions going on in a community to expose members of the community to touch the life of what really goes on in a business, and to hear somebody use the word apprenticeship, that's all a big deal. And I'll give you an example of my learning experience. In 1928, Austin created a city plan. And that plan was successful. It created a Negro district in East Austin. And it succeeded. It led to dividing the community. And in 2012, the city of Austin created a plan called the Imagine Austin Plan that had a breadth and depth of planning for serving the needs of all our people in a variety of ways, but clearly had the objective of closing the gap. That was 10 years ago. And I participated in helping create the plan. I'm a public education advocate. But what we've done and what I've learned is we create plans, but we have a hard time reading them after they've been created and actually demonstrating that we're following a plan. So I would encourage us in the future to actually, even with the Imagine Austin plan, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, look at it and see how much of that work have we done, and how would we show a citizen or a student that we're doing that work. Closing the gap, valuing each person, making people more important than property. So I want to applaud what I just heard and have heard this morning, but to cast light on, we plan, but we have to not let them sit on the shelf.
Thank you.
Okay, go to Loretta.
Thanks, Ro. I was really excited. Thank you for all of your explanations and the partnerships that we're talking about. We're really intrigued by your comments about the use of apprenticeships in other parts of the world. How can we do a better job of incentivizing those kind of apprenticeships at Austin Community College? My name is, Loretta Edelin. I'm with Austin Community College. We're highlighting and looking forward to opportunities to create more partnerships for paid internships. Are these apprenticeships that you're talking about paid? And just, can you talk a little bit more about how we can do a better job of incentivizing those efforts and really trying to encourage more of those partnerships for our students?
Yeah, so I'm going to say a very anti-Texan thing, which is that it does require a bit of federal support. So I'll just say that and just say that I know that we're in a room with Texans, it's not a popular thing to say, but and I say that because in Europe and Australia, the whole apprenticeship model works because there's federal subsidy. The reason why it's working at least a little bit in the US is because there's federal subsidy. So that what that means is that employers are really reticent of paying a full year's salary to a student who's completed a 2 or 3 month training course. So what's typical, and not just a salary, there's a time commitment. Think about the fact that, like I said, in Australia, we get told in uni, or college as I call it here, that you will ultimately be a mentor for an apprentice. So it's part of the culture here, there. It does take time, and if it's not baked within a culture, then it seems like an imposition on the supervisor's time to be supervising someone who's got far fewer skills and experience. And it does take time, not just the hard skills, but the soft skills. So there's a cultural component to it which is harder to navigate, which is frankly one of the biggest challenges I see with apprenticeships taking off. And I'm talking mostly about office level jobs. I don't have as much visibility into manufacturing style apprenticeships. But I think the federal funding piece is a big component to it. Because that helps get major employers at least comfortable with starting or experimenting with apprenticeships. So that, I mean, that's why I'm excited by the National Apprenticeship Act being updated after 80 years or something, that there is like concerted funding for that. I think the role of community partners and community colleges is to provide pipeline for potential apprentices. Because there are companies now that do help employers navigate the apprenticeship process, and there is a process associated with it. It's not just a matter of providing them training. You need to get certification for that training. You then need to work with the employer to ensure that those hours are being recognized and being reported to the Department of Labor so that the employer can get the funding. There's a whole process to it, which is another barrier to employers. But I think I see it as a bit of a value chain, if you like, where the community partners are providing the right set of candidates, the apprenticeship companies in the middle, like a Multiverse or a New that I mentioned, providing some additional training if needed, but more importantly, facilitating that connection to employers, and then working with the employers on the reporting obligations. So that whole ecosystem needs to be built out, I think, but it's just the harder part is increasing the awareness across the ecosystem to colleges and employers as well.
I want to comment on that too, not that I have your knowledge base about apprenticeships, but I would say this: you use the magic word incentivize, and that's what we do in our economic development world. And what I'm hearing from our businesses, and we do over 250 visits a year. I mean, think about that. And so what we're hearing is that they're starting collectively within their own industry channel to figure out, we got to do something. Desperate times, and they're looking at how can we do it different. They're looking to the providers like we've talked with today to help them get there, but they're having to reach out and they're having to work things differently. I think they are as willing to begin new conversation on that because they are desperate for employees. And I think taking that mode and being able to use that in order to work from the ground floor up instead of the top down. In Texas, that's the way we do it. I'm just kidding. Not really. But I think looking at how we can help companies that are willing. When we started working on the additive manufacturing program, it's very small, and I know and it's probably insignificant to what y'all do. But what we were actually just trying to do was to build the platform for how are we going to get employees if they do begin to bust out and they do begin to grow, and they did. And so we can't put together an apprenticeship program, but we can darn sure make that connection for the companies to begin looking at how they can do that. And some of the companies are international too. And they have apprenticeship programs overseas that can be adopted here. And I think looking at the opportunities we have to do that, EOS of North America is a very, very good example. They have one of the best additive programs, training programs in the world in Germany. And we're saying, bring it here. How do we do that? How can we get you to bring that program here? So I think working with our connections here with CAN, there are opportunities for us to actually do some experimenting with your money. Right. Okay.
Real quick, I wanted to add to that. We're real good at talking about what's working, what's nice that's out there. We don't always talk as much about these very real challenges. Apprenticeship is not a new idea. We have failed as a country to implement apprenticeship for many decades. We've just not done it. And the two things I want to mention, and you'd said these, Neeraj, our systems are hard to navigate. I don't know who's interacted, unfortunately, with our healthcare system recently. It's not easy to figure out, surprise billing and anything else. It's not easy to get through our education system to figure those pieces out, or, no offense, our workforce system, or any of these systems are not easy to navigate. Our companies look at what apprenticeship is in this country and say, I don't get enough value for what the system does. We have 3 companies I can name at ACC who are paying their own money, not through the official apprenticeship system, to pay students to go to school. It's Samsung, it's Baylor Scott & White, which is the partner that Tamara mentioned earlier with the apprenticeship program there, and it's Tesla, who is the one program I can talk about, who they hire brand new students and say for the first 4 months your job is to go to ACC. Those are all large entities to do that and take that on. How we scale this and provide incentives to do that is a really important question that's tricky. But I'll leave you with, all of us have connections to or are working in employers right now. We should go back and ask, as ACC has started to do, how many paid internship opportunities, how many earn and learn opportunities do we provide? It's not enough, right? And when you talk to your own employer about why don't we, you'll start to understand quickly why it's so hard. Well, who's going to provide the training? Who's going to make sure that that student's not just doing basic work that anyone else could do? Who's giving real skill sets? Who's creating a pathway? Most of our companies don't think about what's the next step and the next step. We don't build that human resource infrastructure. When we go back to our companies and ask that, it helps illuminate we all have a lot of work to do. ACC included, who's also struggling to build, how do we hire students to do many of the jobs we have at ACC? That's a shift now that we're a year into, and I don't have enough students to point to say where we're successful quite yet, but we will get there.
I'll just add that with our investment committee, when I presented, it was like a 2-hour meeting to present new apprenticeships, talk about apprenticeships, and then one member at the end of the meeting was like, Neeraj, do you want to take on an apprentice within the foundation? I was like, I don't have time for that. And then I didn't realize he was setting me up, and I was like, oh my God, it's contradicted everything that we've been talking about. But no, it's a legitimate challenge, Garret, that you talked about.
All right, one last comment, and then we'll, as you can tell, lunch is ready just because of the aromas, but we'll take one comment or question, and then we'll move on.
I'd just like to add that as far as apprenticeship goes, remember maybe 30 years ago, there was a delegation that went to Koblenz, Germany from Austin with leaders from the business community, and it was organized labor as well as private sector apprenticeship programs, and there was a big exchange going on. And for many reasons, that initiative sort of petered out. But I'm glad that you all are thinking apprenticeship is a great way to go for job training. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. Appreciate